Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 166. Um, Topic today is introducing the Zitadel identity platform. Our guest today is Florian Forster, co-founder and CEO of Zitadel. Welcome, Florian.
Thank you. Hi, Mike.
So before we dive into Citadel, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory? What's the origin story for Citadel?
Thank you. So the origin story is that a bunch of people behind Citadel worked together in a public sector entity in Switzerland, where we built identity infrastructure stuff for, let's say, government to citizen, government to government, government to business related fields. And it always struck us how some platforms missed out on some things like developer experience or APIs or certain parts of the data model, like multi-tenant data models. And
Mhm.
so, when realizing that, we just said, okay, why are we not going to bring something to the world of our own choosing that tries to address these problems? And that's how we embarked on the journey, essentially.
And what was your background also before you got into identity? Like how did you end up here?
Before working in identity, I worked in, let's say, a web agency of sorts. So, like, we built specialized software for industry partners. And even there, I always kind of took in the tasks of the nasty parts of authentication and authorization. So, I gradually moved into that line of work over the course of the last 10 years. And yeah, I think I just stuck to it. And I even helped bring out some standards to the world in e-government in Switzerland on that exact occasion. Originally speaking, like from a trade perspective, I'm a vehicle electronics engineer. So, but we all know that vehicles also have software, so that's kind of not that far apart.
Okay, awesome. Um, so the identity market, it's a broad market. There's a lot of different use cases out there. What is the problem exactly that you would say Citadel is solving?
What always struck us was like when you look at the current solutions, let's say the Oktas, Auth0s, Keycloaks, and all of them, they always made a decision on something. And what we felt is like lacking was mostly down to multi-tenant setups. So, like, when you build something for B2B, you suddenly don't have a native data model at hand in an identity platform of your choosing. That
Mhm.
helped developers actually build B2B applications or just multi-tenant applications per se. And that's something we wanted to unlock. And also, it felt like the combination of developer native, kind of cloud native product with multi-tenancy in mind and self-hostable was something we never found really like to be explicitly there in the market as such. And that's the thing we try to unlock, like, hey, let's build a cloud native identity platform. Let's build it for multi-tenant cases, and also let's have APIs for everything. And let's avoid all these things like, for example, Java SPIs in Keycloak, because they're clearly not nice if you need to upgrade the solution. And so we just applied some of the learnings that we had throughout our careers and tried to build a platform out of that, which we now name Citadel these days.
There was a multi-tenant platform. It just wasn't open source. It's called Okta, and they
Yes.
raised about $500 million to write it, right? So
Yes.
there's a reason why there was no open source multi-tenant platform out there. But you just decided, okay, we're going to take this one on and open source it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, essentially. I mean, we went face on that. And I think multi tenancy is anyway a big word, right? But if we're looking at how Citadel operates, it goes two ways multi tenancy. Because one is we as a company have multiple customers in our cloud service. So you could call that tenant, right? But also, these tenants might have multiple tenants themselves. And so it gets worse from a data model perspective. But that's what Citadel brings to the table. So, in theory, while not super well documented, anybody could choose Citadel to build their own multi-tenant identity service, make money out of it. But that's the risk that we're accepting when we're doing open source. And I think we have way more than enough reasons not to do that for others, but that's what technically is feasible.
So I actually wanted to drill down on multi-tenancy and what that means to you. Um, so what about from a key perspective, key management, like
Yep.
cryptographic key management perspective? So if you're saying, okay, we're hosting multiple OpenID providers,
Yep.
and let's say, acme.com is hosting multiple domains itself, so abc.com, def.com. Does each of those domains have their own keys? And maybe you could talk about sort of key management and
Mhm.
database um, isolation. Like,
Yep.
to what level are you going here from multi-tenancy?
In Citadel's data model is what we call a system is kind of you deploy Citadel as a binary somewhere and it will just inspect HTTP host headers to figure out to which tenant actually the traffic belongs. But the thing that what we call a tenant there is an instance. You can think of an instance as just being a virtual identity system that is used by one customer in that sense. And it also exposes the OpenID Connect discovery documents, the JOX endpoint, and SAML metadata, and all these funny things. But what we do essentially is a tenant in that sense, or an instance, has only one set of key pairs and one set of APIs to rotate these keys these days. Because there's a lot of learnings around automatically rotating keys. Because I think you break quite a lot of libraries when you automatically rotate keys, at least from our experience. So we even removed that capability from Citadel during our journey. But that's how we think what a tenant is. It has one key pair or multiple sets of key pairs, but they're still tied to one JOX document in that sense. And what happens internally in Citadel is we have a discriminator row in a database table in Postgres where we just filter out, okay, domain A resolves to instance ID XYZ, and then we're going to grab the keys for you. And that's literally all that happens. So it's kind of a soft isolation. And if customers need to have more, let's say, more strict isolation guarantees, they typically opt for self-hosting and run their own database server and everything. So that's kind of how we see the world there from that perspective.
Um, and so at a high level, authentication is a pretty mature market, right?
Yeah.
Um, do you think from the customer's perspective, or do you think authentication is a solved problem? And if not, why not?
I think it's solved by like 82%. But I mean, I think it's technologically safe, solved to a big extent. So that's what I can get behind. I think there is a lot of open-ended questions around user experience, especially with the rise of, let's say, for example, passkeys that introduce still a lot of friction in the market because passkeys per se, great thing. But then as soon as you enter the challenges of key management, we're always at the same ballpark again, like of why is that thing not solved in a great way? It is solved, but not in a way that it is easily transferable because it kind of defeats the purpose sometimes of security. But then, so what I'm trying to say there is some wiggle room for optimizations on that end. I would say from a technological standpoint, it's mostly solved. UX is kind of the big drawback, if you ask me there, and it does not help that Google has a different approach on how it renders the UI for passkeys versus Apple does render the UI and all the others, and 1Password has its own implementation that you hook into the extension in your browser. So I think that's just confusing to the user in the end. And so I think that's where I see some hesitancy about the broader field, I would say.
Do you think we should embed a digital interface into people so that they have an authenticator that they cannot lose at
So
birth, maybe?
So here I go, but I worked on standardization of electronic IDs for citizens, like EIDs in Switzerland. And the question that always comes up is like, should we not just use biometrics? And the thing, I mean, I hate to say it or be the guy that breaks it, but I hate using biometrics, for example, for authentication related purposes because you can simply not replace them. And I think the same, or in that vicinity, also falls the questioning of should we not just put something into people? But it's on that gray line between it's a knowledge factor and it's something that you have, but it's a spicy area, I would say. I'd rather not, honestly. I'd rather have a phone that has a key to it or a YubiKey or whatever
But
that
do you
does the
think it's
job for
going to
me.
happen? That people make a choice to do it?
I mean, the big problem that everybody tries to solve is like, how can you bind authenticators to the subject, right? That's kind of the unresolved mystery. Because in all the, let's say, approaches to verify whether the user in front of the computer is factually the user, we always end up in the same problem that there is no literal proof for who is in front of the computer and in possession of the credentials. And as a society, we can either deal with the fact that there is an uncertainty and let's say a threat window in there, or we just need to solve it somehow. I think it's just cost of doing business, so we should just treat it as such. But yeah, that's my opinion on that subject.
Yeah. You know, the EU, of course, is ahead of the US in terms of digital wallet sort of research and development. I don't know
Yeah,
about rollout because I don't know if it's really rolled out. Um, but
it
they're
is.
ahead of us in sort of thinking and research and development. Um, how do you think sort of this new paradigm of people being issued credentials into their wallets is going to impact the market? And what types of wallets do you think will be most prevalent? Or do you have just no opinion on this, which is totally fine too?
No, I have a sort of stringent opinion on it. I'm not sure it's a great one, but I have one. So I think platform players will crunch the market again there. So I think Apple will have a good success with their wallet implementation and storing in there, and I think it will happen because of how they have a fairly distributed approach in like they have a lot of users already. So that will help adoption severely, if you ask me. I'm not that fond of having a wallet for all the attributes that I have in my life because if that would really solve a problem, we would have used X509 certificates on PDFs for quite a while or on JSON. So the technical capability to express something and to prove it to somebody else has been there to 80%, right? We only lacked zero knowledge proofs and partial disclosures. So what is really changing, if you ask me, is kind of the challenge there. So I think there is a market for all the SSI kind of concepts, but I think they make many things also worse, like key recovery, key exchange. It's not exactly that much more easier. And when people start storing stuff in a blockchain, it also gets worse. So there is a lot of unanswered questions on the long haul there, if you ask me.
Yeah. So I want to pivot to a second for open source because Citadel is developed as an open source project, right?
Yes.
Um, and you know, the first so Glue is also an open source platform, and I get asked by a lot of people. So, what's the business model for Glue? Like, how do you? There's this flow of CVEs, you know, vulnerabilities that need to be patched on a timely basis, and
Yep.
how do you fund basically forever this infrastructure, you know, or the software?
Yeah.
Um, what were your takes on how to fund the open source and build the business model around that? And also, why open source it? Also, why not just do Okta 2.0?
So I believe in trust, and transparency is a key driver to establish trust in that sense. Like we show clearly what we're building, we're showing how we're building it. We accept the fact that that introduces a little bit of a risk because it's like a white box and everybody can poke your code and see where the vulnerabilities are. But I think that's the better trade-off to do than the opposite side around. So that's part of what we believe, and the big part is the transparency factor there. But also, what's in there is, um, how do I put that? I mean, companies need to make money, and also sustainable open source projects need to be funded somehow. And what we essentially believe in there is that there is a cutoff line between free lunch and where we enable business partners to be successful. So, how I like to think about it is we should only monetize what is a value add to a product. So, I'm starting to believe more and more one should not charge for users or authentication capabilities. But for example, you could totally charge for, like, hey, you want to have a password policy that verifies the last 10 passwords were the same. I think that's something you should monetize as a product. And the reason being, it just discriminates behavior that's typically purely a business enabler or a security enabler, but it does not sacrifice the user security per se. So that's kind of the way I think about that balancing act. So I'd rather monetize what brings people some value around achieving certifications or around just enabling their business by having policies and stuff. But I don't want to sacrifice the security of a single user in the same sense. So, and yeah, it's kind of a challenge to walk that line, but you need to walk it somehow.
Right. So authentication's a really wide market. There's tons of standards. There's a
Yeah.
lot of features and products and integrations. Um, what would you say are your priorities for 2026? Your R&D priorities. What are you guys working on?
We just laid out the plan for 2026, and there's a lot of things to do with improving how Citadel behaves at scale. And we have fairly big customers like Klaviyo and Airbus and these companies. So there is, let's say, a big part of work on how can we keep Citadel operationally lean, like easy to operate, but still able to scale to their needs. So that's where we spend quite a bit of time. And other engagements are centered around on how can we make it easier for people to start using Citadel, because there is multiple UIs in Citadel. We have our cloud service, and the cloud service has kind of a different onboarding than the self-hostable product. So we're trying to consolidate our effort there to make it more lean. Like from the time to choose Citadel to deploy it to use it should not be more than 5 minutes. And so that's what we're investing quite a bit of time on making and optimizing that path. And then we're going to apply many learnings on how APIs should look like and should be named and all these things. So it's a lot of plumbing work, but still important, because the language you use, the API technology you choose can clearly enable or not enable people when they're trying to pull something off. And also what we did recently was like carving out the hosted login we have. Like we bring a turnkey login for people because we think that helps them get started. And we ripped that out of the Go backend we had and moved it into a Next.js application that clearly uses the same set of APIs that everybody can use. So all in all, like, what could be said is we're trying to improve the developer experience on Citadel, because we believe that's the right thing to do in order to enable more developers to just use a well-rounded and well-made product to enable their day-to-day jobs, rather than building out all the nasty details that you need to take care of in identity and authentication in general.
So um, some customers actually want data sovereignty, and
Yeah.
and with Citadel you can actually self-host.
Yes.
Um, Would you say that the self-hosting part of your business has more revenues or the SaaS part? And where do you see the growth trajectories of those two, of that breakdown? Is the SaaS growing faster or vice versa?
It's actually an oddity to look at it, but customer wise, like in amount of customers, SaaS grows faster, but in amount of revenue, self hosting grows faster. So it's a little bit of two ways.
Hmm.
And the self hosting has some unique advantages that some customers really like. And one of the foremost there, besides having more control over where data stays and who has access to it, is actually how release cycles are done, because they can make decisions on their own, like, hey, we want to upgrade Citadel now, or we don't want to, or we want to align the release schedule with other applications that we have in house. So there is a big enabler in that our customers tend to like. Yeah.
Right. One of the pain points, I started Glue 15 years ago because I was really frustrated with ForgeRock, or
Oh,
this is
we
actually
share that one.
before ForgeRock existed. It was actually Sun Access Manager, or
Yep.
then it was OpenSSO. Sorry, and we felt that it was just too hard to customize it. Like it
Yep.
took a Java developer
Yep.
um, and some serious know-how in order to customize anything in OpenSSO.
Yep.
Um, and we wanted to use Python or something more, lightweight to customize it. So that's one of the original reasons, like we started Glue in 2009. Um, but so, what's your take on this? Um, the identity platform is really like middleware,
Mhm.
and in order to really meet that last 20% that you keep talking about,
Yep.
like a lot of times you need some customizations.
Yep.
So and it turns out that the knowledge transfer becomes difficult. Like if you have a whiz kid who writes the customizations, but then he leaves or she leaves, and then the next team takes over and doesn't understand all the code, it can lead to a lot of friction in
Yep.
terms of the knowledge transfer. So what's sort of your philosophy and take on how do you customize the platform?
I mean, our decision is relatively well influenced from the things we have experienced with Keycloak. And I'm not trying to throw Keycloak under the bus here, but there is a lot of challenges maintaining SPIs when you need to upgrade Keycloak over a course of time. And so we realized, okay, it might not be that a great idea to embed extensibility code into the product. And so they did go into the direction for us that we started with having what we call actions, like it's close to actions at Auth0. You essentially could just throw in a piece of JavaScript code into Citadel and we would execute that for you, and you could alter and change the behavior. But during our time doing that, we realized that the developer experience is not that great. And so we shifted our approach to, let's say, a more like webhook kind of oriented approach. So what we're doing these days is we have a semantic language in Citadel where you can define what things you want us to forward to your code. And these things start with, I want to have all the HTTP requests before they're processed in Citadel, like the request, and I want to alter it before I further go down the pipeline. And
Mhm.
what happens essentially is you can define, okay, all the HTTP requests going to the token endpoint, I want to have them. We send the payload to a cloud function of your choice. You can alter the body and send it back to Citadel, and then we further process it. And so what we build out is what we call Actions version 2, is just a way of sending events to outside endpoints, typically an HTTP endpoint, that you should host in something that's close to Citadel, like a fast service of sorts, like Cloudflare Workers is a good example in this case. And we just send you what we have. You manipulate it and send it back to us. And it goes two ways. One is RPC style, like we wait for you until you did your changes. And the other one is just fire and forget, like we send you an event and you do whatever you want with it. And that allows for a fair bit of customization. Like, for example, if you want to check whether the IP address of a user is in a country that is sanctioned for your service, well, then you write your own sanctioning service and just tell Citadel no, not for compute on that end when the IP from the user is somewhere in a country you don't want to serve. Sorry, good and dandy, works like a charm. Or if a business customer does a sign up, like creates an organization in Citadel, we can send you an event and you can process that in your Salesforce or wherever your system lives. So what I'm trying to say there is we have a fairly open approach, but it's more aimed and geared towards developers because it allows them to write their own glue code outside of Citadel, and we just hand them over the data they need. That's kind of our current approach.
Hmm.
And while it's a little bit harder as a learning curve, it feels superior because you just need to agree on the semantics about the API, and that's about it. And there is no much more in that sense. And people can just use their developer experience they have. Like they can run the code locally, they can expose it through an HTTP endpoint, and just debug things along that process as well. So it just improves the developer life essentially. And it does not, if you update Citadel, it should not break the implementation because it's just a pre-agreed contract anyways. Yeah.
Um, One of the existential questions for IDPs isn't about login, but it's
Oh
about
yeah.
log out.
Yep. Oh yeah. Oh, you don't get me started on logout. There is a lot of things
Well,
going
I
on.
actually wanted to spool you up a little bit and get you started about logout. What are some of the challenges you see with logout, just in a nutshell? But is there any light at the end of the tunnel for logout? How do you think customers should think about logout from mobile and web applications?
I mean, logout is always a pesky piece, right? About session management and who revokes it correctly and who gets notified that something changes. So I would not call it solved or lighthearted. So it's definitely a spicy problem. So I mean, I think what I tend to recommend to people trying to implement authentication with login and logout is that they're trying to reduce the amount of session management they do on their own. But also that depends a little bit on the platform, right? So like if you're building for an app versus a website has different requirements and different needs. But I think what I'm trying to say here is you should reduce the amount of session management you're trying to do in your own application over what you already have in a central system to the bare minimum, and be really, really smart about the deviations you do. Like in mobile apps, for example, yeah, there is sometimes a good amount of reasoning for, yeah, I want to have a user being authenticated even while offline, which is reasonable. But then the question is, okay, that does not turn into a full-on session management at that time. It's more like I have a transient session on the device. And so I think it's mainly thinking about session management is a big challenge in there because all the back channel logout and all these funny things, while they solve some problems, they're also hard to scale sometimes, especially if you have multiple clients across multiple technologies that are unavailable or not available, right? So that's not exactly the easy thing to solve in a distributed landscape.
It sounds like you're almost advocating for a dynamic authorization engine in the at the edge of the network.
Yeah, I mean, I could see people verifying policies and their compliance on device. So I can totally see a case for that. Yes, and I think the more you can provide as turnkey capability to developers, the easier it will get to adopt it on the long haul. Because if people start reinventing the wheel there, it just leads to more different outcomes, and the amount of permutations and problems might be not easy to tackle. Yeah. So yeah, I see that. Yeah.
I'd like to tap on your experience, sort of. Well, you mentioned that you worked in the government sector, um, and why would a government agency need multi-tenancy? Or I'd love to hear the business case for what were each of these tenants in your
Yeah.
government specific use case.
It's about multiple pieces there. One is You have different federal levels, like you have federal and state level, and they might want to do stuff with each other because one has data that the other hasn't, and such scenarios. Then you have things like first responders that you also need to tie into the equation. So, for example, in Switzerland, um, the there is like a citizen register, and that's controlled by the state typically. But then police organizations might need to request data from that register. But the life
Mhm.
cycle of an employee as a police officer from state records is totally decoupled. They're two different and distinct organizations. And so what you see end up there is like you have already that concept of a federation in that sense, where two people, two organizations have different life cycle, different needs. And so what somebody needs to build is like a platform that ties that back together and makes it workable without falling too much into an N over N problem. Because there's like 26 states in Switzerland. There is also as many police corps, and that does exclude a lot of the upper like federal level and then the communal level below. So there is way too much to make N over N happen. And that's where a system that can address all these needs at one place actually came out to be effective. And it goes beyond that because there is also government to citizen stuff. Like when you're filing taxes, you might want to extend your deadline. So you need to kind of have a way of interfacing with the government there. And the same can be said about companies. Companies might want to file for some things like their yearly reporting needs and these things. So we call them just G2G, like government to government, G2C, government to citizen, and G2B, government to business. And so there is a lot of these cases where it's
Right.
always about multi-tenancy in that sense.
So, well, I agree that it's always, we are in a multi-domain environment where
Yeah.
each domain has its own identity management process, and along with that comes an amount of trust you might put on it.
Yes.
But I'm wondering about, in the multi-tenancy case, you have one operator that's actually sort of responsible for operating these other instances.
Yeah.
In the state of Texas, we there was a RFC, and they described, there's actually a great video about it. They did a market engagement video, and they
Okay.
talked about how, um, when they in their first IDP deployment, they deployed one big ForgeRock instance.
Yeah.
But after 10 years, the contract ran up, and they said, you know what? We don't actually need one instance.
Yeah.
We actually need to be able to spool up instances for different, like
Yeah.
maybe DPS needs the Department of Public Service needs an instance, and Department of Education needs an instance, and, the vote counters need an instance, et cetera.
Yeah.
So they moved to a more, like you're describing, a multi-tenant situation. Um, but I guess who in the case is the operator? Would Swisscom like operate that, or is there a trusted government like high level operational staff that might operate that on behalf of various n number of agencies?
It goes multiple ways. So that depends on, like, we work for a company called Abraxas. So they only provide government services in essence. But the funny thing is states choose. So they just do their own procurement, and just decide on who they are going to assign a contract. And so part of the whole effort we did was, one is standardization and agreeing on how contracts should look like so that
Right.
systems tend to be cross operational, but also providing a system where you can easily onboard new tenants and also get rid of them again once they're deciding to go for another service
Mhm.
provider, right? And so it did go both ways. So we operated a system that had multiple tenants across multiple government entities, and they interfaced sometimes with government entities that use different services. So some government entities at that point in time used like Microsoft 0365,
Mhm.
and also data was consumed from that end. We consumed data from Swisscom. So it was not like a one size fits all. It's more like everybody can pick and choose, and sometimes you can have them all in one, but sometimes you also need to accept external sources. So it actually was able to do both at that point.
I know I asked this question already in a different form, but can each tenant have their keys in an HSM?
In Citadel, not right now, not no. Where we don't support external HSM users right now. The reason is relatively simple. We have not found the HSM that we really like, so and that is ubiquity available. So
Hmm.
that's kind of a downturn, if you ask me. And yeah, we can start implementing multiple, but we opted for just creating our own keys and storing them encrypted in a database. But yeah, that's the current state of the union.
Right. But there's also cloud key vault services these days.
Yes.
And I wonder if some of those are backed by, I'm not a cloud expert. I wonder if some of those are, might be backed by HSM operations or hardware.
There is, I mean, with Google, you can have, for example, in GCP, there is an offering backed by an HSM. But then again, we don't want to tie ourselves too much to Google, right? So it's kind of, I don't know. There
Hmm.
is more, there's a multitude of options there. But honestly, so far, not we haven't had a customer telling us it's a 100% deal breaker, because most times the key material we use is relatively sparse, right? So we only have like signing keys for tokens in general and some SAML stuff.
Hmm.
Beyond that point, there is not much private key material in Citadel, I would say, because most of the stuff we do is verifying credentials from other people. So we have a lot of, let's say, password hashes and these things. But yeah,
Um, so your platform's written in Go.
yeah,
Um, the Ori is also written in Go. Um,
yeah.
how much or how do you think Go fits into the equation here? Like, why do you choose Go, and how is it helping you?
I mean, the reason why we choose Go is it strikes a good balance between developer performance and runtime performance. So that's my sentiment about it. And since identity is on the verge of infrastructure to application from a stack, I mean, it's not clearly one or the other. It's a little bit of both. We think Go is a good choice for these scenarios because you can get a lot of traffic through with little infrastructure on that you need for that. And so that's the reason why we're essentially sticking to Go, and we have been fairly happy with it. There's not many things that we would like to complain about the language of choice. One could argue Rust is better. One could argue Java is better, right? So there's always a left and right, and one could also argue once some pieces of the services might be faster in another language. But then again, uh, in all honesty, the thing that costs us the most besides database queries sometimes is clearly hashing of things like password hashing, bcrypt, for example. And bcrypt is not that much faster with Rust, so it's kind of, I don't know, this does not bring me the value proposition to make a move on that end to fully rewrite Citadel in that sense.
Hmm. No, so yeah, as a Rust fan, we like Rust for like something that's a little more discrete
Yeah,
than an IDP. Yeah. Um, Interesting. And so okay. Um, I wanted to ask you, sort of last question, at a high level, MFA.
yeah,
Um, So, do you see MFA as driving sort of your growth? If not, what are the other growths, or what are the other areas that are sort of driving growth?
yeah.
And um, where do you see passwords going? A lot of people are predicting passwords are going to go away. Like the future of passwords and MFA in like
Yeah.
3 minutes.
So it's a big chunk of information there. Are passwords going away? I don't believe so. While I would love to be, it's just too many people use it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, let me make an example here. If a developer just wants to test an API, I mean, what are the options? It's typically you send a token, okay, but in that process, it already turns into something that is shareable and kind of acts as a password, even though we don't like to call it that
Shared
way. But
secret.
so they will not go away in that sense. So sharing secrets over the wire will stay for us for quite a bit, I would say. Are they going away in user authentication? I would say over the course of the next 5 years, it will be going down. But as I elaborated on the whole passkey stuff, I think it's not yet prime time, in a sense that many people don't understand the technology yet for what happens in private public key concepts.
Hmm.
And so I will think the whole OTP username password is still there for quite a while. I would bet on something that in 10 years we will still see username password and an OTP being a part of doing business. What we're seeing though as a trend is more and more people embark in single sign-on strategies more and more. That's, I mean, since we have a lot of B2B customers, that's what we see. They like to tie in their existing identity sources, and there are certainly some improvements possible on the whole AMR claim situation because that's not that well distributed across industries. So agreeing on a contract how to transport information is there, but I think enforcing it is kind of the tricky piece, meaning trusting each other's guarantees on how authentication has been done is a little bit in a weird spot these days. But my assessment is single sign-on will be big driver in adoption for identity in general. Username, password, and OTPs and other multi-factor authentication tools will stay around for quite a bit, is my assessment.
Yeah, yeah. If I could just react off that a little bit, you mentioned AMR,
Yeah,
like communicating basically what type of authentication happened here.
yeah,
Um, and I wonder if that's more of a trust issue, like
it is.
maybe needs to happen through the consensus of a federation or through as a bilateral agreement at this point today.
I mean,
So
I think because the technical capabilities are there to express what happened, right? So it's only a contractual problem, but then some people want to control that part of the equation. Like we heard CISOs tell us, yeah, but I don't trust the customer system to do multi-factor authentication. I want to do my own multi-factor authentication on top of the single sign-on. That's a risk choice and risk modeling right there. It's not technically speaking, it's not a technical problem, right? It's more like a trust issue.
yeah, and you actually allude to another interesting caveat or nuance, which is how do I make policies about tokens from multiple domains?
Oh
I
yeah.
have a token from Google, but in order to trust it, maybe I need a token from this other domain. And I think there's still a lot of these trust issues,
Oh yeah.
dare I call them governance or GovOps issues that maybe need to be addressed to really get interdomain federation and collaboration.
Oh yeah. And I mean, with the rise of agentic AI, it will only get worse because these things or the AI agents might want to do something in the name of someone, but then need to access something, right? So we see the whole problem space come up again in multi-domain trust challenges because there is a lot of things going on, right? Token exchange is a famous example here from OAuth that has the technology, but somehow you need to weave it in. And I think there is a lot of work to be done on that end.
So, just want to give you a last chance to have any last thoughts, upcoming events where we might be able to see you, or any other announcements.
No upcoming events. We're silently working on Citadel version 5. Should bring on a big bunch of improvements to make customers' lives easier. And so, if people have a B2B or multi tenant case, I would happily invite them to give Citadel a spin and self host it or try out our cloud service. And that's all I can say. I hope people would like it.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed this interview, and if you watching this remotely are enjoying the show or at least find it useful, please follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn or YouTube and comment. That helps us with the algorithms. And just want to announce the next episode will be breaking through the IGA visibility wall with Nicholas Hunt coming up this Thursday, I guess. And with that, I'll say, Florian, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. And thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.